We have speakers from all over the globe. This is actually our first global event. We've brought together the BCA teams in both Boston, San Francisco, London and Dubai to bring you speakers from around the world and from many different industries. So before I introduce our first speaker, just some background of what BCA is and what we are trying to do. So we aim to prepare the next generation of business leaders to make decisions with sustainability, global awareness, relations, all in mind. And actually we use the analysis of the intersection between both business and current affairs to do that. The event we're putting on today is actually looking at the post-COVID world. So now that we have vaccines, large-scale vaccination programs being carried out across the globe, the way that life is at the moment is starting to return to some sense of normality. The speakers today will bring with them their experience in both the industries and their job roles to give us a flavour of actually what the new normal looks like as we emerge out of the COVID world. So having said that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mohamed Louadi. As you can see, he's a professor on information systems and also an expert in blockchains. So without further ado, and again, thank you for your patience today, I'll hand over to Mohamed, who can present and introduce himself.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be with you, students of Dubai, Boston, San Francisco, and London. My presentation today is going to be spanning some 300 years. I'm going to try to beat that feat in 15 minutes or so. And the title will be around the post-COVID world and information technology, decentralized autonomous organizations, and telework. So as I was preparing for this webinar, I was looking at books, old and new books, and I was looking at this cover, and it occurred to me while looking at the cover that there was this symbol, this funny symbol you see here surrounding the word firm, and how much it looked to this, another symbol. And in fact, what I'm going to try to do is to try to explore the interlocking between firms, business, and what's happening to us under COVID. So I'm going to put that up there with my logo, which was meaning here, we have the clockwork, meaning technology, and we're going to add the virus along with it. So one of the most direct impacts of the virus in our life, individually and collectively, is first confinement, distancing, and especially connectedness. And we discovered how connected we are. If we look at this video now, we're going to see how fast the virus spread in just 4 months. Almost hand in hand, and reach in a year some 136 million people contaminated. And it was from country to country in almost no time. So connected we are, and connectedness is the key word, as it in fact makes us think about networks. And networks of people, interconnections of people. And I'm going to do the same thing with 3 different concepts which are seemingly disconnected or independent. First is telework, work from home, the impact that we all lived with, collective intelligence as a second, and distributed or decentralized autonomous organization. Somehow I have a preference for distributed, but that's another story. Now, given the length of the phrase, from now on, I'm just going to say DAO, as people say. And I was looking at another article that was published in 1937 of a guy called Ronald Coase. Now, in that article, Ronald Coase asked a very simple, or seemingly simple question. Why do we have companies? Why do we have businesses? Why do firms exist? Now, believe it or not, to have found the answer to that question got him the Nobel Prize in 1937. Now, what was the answer? Why do we have businesses? Now, his answer was very simple. It is about costs. So as long as it is cheaper to perform something inside the firm will exist. And if something is cheaper to perform outside, then they will outsource it and it will be performed by somebody else. So what happened as another consequence to this, around 1760, the start of the first industrial revolution, was that when people were working at home, suddenly they started finding more interesting and cheaper and more economically efficient to gather in one place. And that was the creation of the firm. And so people, and the hierarchy and all these things. So people would go to plants, this is what it was then, or to organizations, this is what it is now. As you can see, things have not changed much in 260 years, between 1760 and today. People will leave home to meet in one place to do a work, or some kind of work, because it was cheap, because it was better, because that's where they will find machines, complicated, complex, very heavy machines. And the organization in the span of those 260 years moved from the hierarchy, and I guess you had courses about this, to markets. So hierarchy is the organization doing things inside, and the markets when organizations realize that some things could be cheaper if they were made outside the organization, in the markets. And then we moved into networks, where we have partners scattered around the world, and then we start talking about supply chains and supply chain management. So this is the evolution. But if you ask me, inside the organization, the relationships between people and tasks and transactions did not change fundamentally. But they are about to do that now. And that's, in fact, the purpose of the presentation. Then came social distancing and the lockdown and COVID. Now, what happened is amazingly interesting, because what is happening is the opposite of what happened right after the Industrial Revolution. When people were collecting in a firm in one place to do work, what is happening today is that now people are distancing and moving away from the meeting point, the organization, and they start working at home again. So that's where we get to telework. Now, telework is the end of this. We no longer commute. We no longer move from one place to another. We stay where we are. And that is where we realized that, in fact, before we did this, half of the space of this planet was unoccupied. If we are at home, the office is empty. If we are at the office, home is empty. Now we do both at home, and office spaces are empty because they are deserted, and only people who need to be there go there. Otherwise, people would just work from home that way. And we go back to this. So if we found articles like this, now this article was published last year at about the beginning of the pandemics, and it says that before the coronavirus, telework was an optional benefit mostly for the affluent few. And at the same time, that's where the people were still saying coronavirus, using big words instead of COVID-19. So it was not mostly for the few. Now, what few? Well, people like these, computer geeks, if you like. And they were saying, Facebook, Apple, and Twitter, and others, that telework is now here to stay. And that they are adopting and espousing this new mode of work from the office, and they're going to do it from now on that way. So you'd say, well, this is for IT, this is for technical fields. But then if we look at the percentage of workers over time, between 2011 and 2020, I failed to find more recent figures. This is the evolution of telework and the percentage of people working from home. As you can see, yes, technical people up here, but we have business also, and consulting. We also have administration, customer service, sales, operations, and legal. But what's funny is that we find education down here. Now, maybe we should review these numbers. Me being in education, I have a completely different experience. So it's all across the board. Telework is moving in and maybe is going to be in to stay. So let's go back now, and I say remember, I know it's just a few minutes ago, what Mr. Ronald Coase said. It's all about costs. Now, what costs? I'm going to keep it short. I'm just going to summarize these costs, keep it simple. We have search costs, communication costs, documentation costs, redundancy costs. Now, my favorite is redundancy cost. The cost of reinventing the wheel. The cost of, or the opportunity cost, or inventing wheels that are square. The cost of slack, the cost of making mistakes. And also contracting costs. Now, all these are called to be reduced for the firm to justify its own existence by making it so that costs inside the firm will always be lower than outside the firm. Otherwise, we're going to have networks. Search costs have been dealt with technology. Now, search costs, thanks to the web 2.0 or web 3.0, as I heard somebody say recently, have been reduced thanks to the internet. Communication costs reduced thanks to email, SMS, social networks, and social media. Redundancy costs thanks to ERPs, enterprise resource planning, those big integrated systems that will allow sequences of tasks to be performed almost automatically inside the firm, and now even outside the firm with the extended, or the concept of the extended enterprise. And cloud computing, of course, and its consequent technologies, the Internet of Things. Again, all these technologies have taken their toll on cost in organizations. Contracting costs have not been touched yet by IT, and I say yet because this is about to happen. But trust is coming in, and that's the reason why we have contracts, because people simply do not trust each other. Some people will add coordination costs, and that's when collective intelligence comes in, and nature may give us a lesson regarding coordination. Now, let's look at that. These are stalling somewhere in London, somewhere in England, in fact, I'm not sure it's in London. And look at the coordinations of these birds. They don't bump into each other, that never happened. They don't crash into each other. And then finally, they all decide, suddenly, to stand down and fall back. Now, who made the decision? When was it diffused to the other birds? And how can they be so coordinated? Collective intelligence is, in fact, the study also of ants, which are studied by, I think, there's a science called myrmecology, whose purpose is to study ants and the behavior of ants, because they do have lessons to give us. Just watch this. Now, these are insects, if I may call them that. They're not very smart, but they are extremely organized when they are together. Now, why do they study them? Now, it's funny to move from IT, or Web 2.0, etc., to study ants, simply because they give us lessons as to how to design organizations and how to self-organize. And there are books written about them, and people there actually spend their time trying to understand how they do what they do. One of them is about swarm intelligence, which is a branch of AI. And that's another technology I didn't mention yet because I was waiting for this moment. They solve complex tasks by simple local means. Now, local means mean localized. Their productivity is better than the sum of their single activities. Swarm intelligence is the emerging field of biologically inspired AI based on the behavioral models of social insects, which behave like social entities, such as ants, bees, wasps, and termites. So we're not only talking about ants, which, by the way, are only capable of having 250,000 neurons. So we're not talking about individual intelligence, we're talking about collective intelligence. Compared to the humans, who sport some 100 billion neurons, or chimps, 30 billion neurons. But it's not, intelligence is not about the number of neurons, or else how would we explain that elephants have 260 billion neurons and counting? So what's the deal? How do they do it? Especially that we discovered, and we keep on discovering things about these ants, is that the community, the colony, has a memory that each individual members do not have. So can we do the same thing? Can we move past our individual intelligence to reach that new thing, which is collective intelligence, which has nothing to do with the sum of individual intelligence? It's a completely new concept. And this, what I've just said, was discovered by people working at MIT, especially Thomas Malone, in this paper published in Science in 2010, which says that there is something new, evidence of the existence of a concept called collective intelligence. Let's listen to him.
What does collective intelligence mean? Well, I think it's important to realize that intelligence is not just something that happens inside individual brains. It also arises with groups of individuals. In fact, I define collective intelligence as groups of individuals acting collectively in ways that seem intelligent. Now, by that definition, of course, collective intelligence has been around for a very long time. Families, companies, countries, armies, those are all examples of groups of people working together in ways that at least sometimes seem intelligent.
Now, companies, that's the word he just mentioned that's going to take us back from ants and collective intelligence to business. Now, you look at that ant, it may be smart with 250,000 neurons, but this is smarter than that ant, collectively smarter. It's not because we have many ants, it's just because we have a colony or sub-colony. These are smarter than the ones we just saw, and they get smarter and smarter and smarter as they multiply, and they get to the million ants together, just like we are billion people together now, connected pretty much the same way ants should be. Or this way, because we can automate these connections. Or this, meaning that something is going to be automated, something that is autonomous yet that collectively will give a result. And that's going to take us down to distributed or decentralized autonomous organizations, again, the DAOs. Now, what are DAOs? They're organizations that run on their own without any hierarchical management, exactly like ants. And only collectively do they make sense. They operate based on a predefined code, a type of smart contract. Now back to contracts and contracting. Remember, we talked about this earlier, contracts, which is the solution to the lack of trust that people have. And again, we're going to contract people together to perform transactions that will become cheaper as we go. So as long as it is cheaper to do something inside, the firm will still exist. Thanks to smart contracts, they'll allow people to do things even if they don't trust each other. And then we have an entirely automated procedure written in computer code, in a language that is also based on the blockchain and Ethereum, because it's with Ethereum that all these things came to be. Do they exist yet? Yes, we have 3 examples above and beyond the one that everybody knows, the DAO, which got hacked sometime of $1 million. When will they be mainstream? Well, some Bitcoin expert said it's going to happen within the next 30 years. That statement was made in 2018, so if we keep counting, this is where it's happening. We still have 27 years to go before all organizations become DAOs. But it's already starting. Now we look at about a month ago, Wyoming takes a step ahead to clarify the legal status of DAOs. So it is happening. It's happening very slow compared to what is happening with the blockchain. New Nevada legislation recognizes blockchain, but that happened in 2017, and this happened in Arizona. So it's happening. It's very much in its infancy. It's not yet prime time, but this is how the 3 things I talked about, telework, collective intelligence, and DAOs, are going to meet and converge in less than 30 years, plus the 260 since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That makes up the 300 years I promised you at the beginning. My name is Mohamed Louadi from Tunis. I thank you very much for your attention.